This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Israel warns the world against renewing the Iranian nuclear deal. Will the U.S. and others listen? And 1 year after the U.S. pullout from Afghanistan, the country becomes a terrorist sanctuary. Plus, could building on ancient biblical ties be the answer to Middle East peace? All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Julie Stahl. Israel and Arab countries are bracing themselves as world powers seem set to re-enter the 2015 Iranian nuclear deal. As CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell reports, some fear the negative impact it's likely to have on the Middle East and beyond.
Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid is still urging the U.S. and other nations to stay away from what he calls a bad deal.
It would give Iran $100 billion a year. This money will not build schools or hospitals. This is $100 billion a year that will be used to undermine stability in the Middle East and spread terror around the globe.
His remarks to foreign journalists came as both sides reported progress in the talks.
In our eyes, it does not meet the standards set by President Biden himself, preventing Iran from becoming a nuclear state.
Former Israeli ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, calls it a shameful moment.
When President Biden was elected, he said clearly that he will make sure that the new agreement will be stronger and longer. What we are seeing today is a weaker and shorter agreement that will actually allow Iran to continue with their nuclear ambitions. It will be dangerous for Israel and for the region.
The U.S. and other world powers first signed a nuclear deal with Iran in 2015. 3 years later, then President Trump withdrew. Since then, Iran has openly broken the terms. 16 months ago, the EU began trying to revive the agreement.
They want to sign the agreement and to say we finished with that. But that's not the case. That's why together with our allies in the region, we will have to stand strong against Iran and prepare ourselves for every option.
Reserve Brigadier General Yossi Kupavasser says Russia, China, and Iran would benefit from such an agreement.
From a global point of view, this is a very dangerous development because it means that all the three main powers that want to change the global order are making progress in their efforts because they understand that there is an American weakness.
Danon feels a deal would put Israel in a challenging position and believes the U.S. is taking advantage of Israel's political situation. With upcoming elections and what Danon calls an inexperienced leader, he believes the next government would need to do three things.
First is to isolate Iran. Second is to call for more sanctions. And third is to build our military capability. So if we will have to take care of this threat ourselves, we will have the means to do it.
Despite political differences, Danon maintains when it comes to Iran, Israel will be united. Chris Mitchell, CBN News.
Many are also wondering what impact a renewed Iranian nuclear deal would have on the Abraham Accords. Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain agreed to the breakthrough deal 2 years ago, and Morocco and Sudan joined shortly thereafter. Now the UAE has announced it will upgrade its ties with Iran and plans to reinstate its ambassador to Tehran for the first time in 6 years. The UAE's foreign ministry said in a statement that the move is in line with UAE efforts to strengthen relations with Iran and achieve the common interests of the two countries and the wider region. Former Israeli ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, told CBN News about his concerns regarding the accords.
You know, the accords are very important. We will continue to cooperate with our new allies. But I think it shows that when the U.S. is not strong, you know, the allies of the U.S. might look for others to depend on them. And that's a problem. And I think we might see more nations actually starting to develop some kind of a relationship with the Iranians because they will feel that the U.S. is actually not supporting them. I think it's a bad message for the region. You know, we need to be together, we need to fight evil together, and we should not allow those countries to start to think about other options in the region.
On November 1st, Israelis will head to the polls for the 5th time in less than 4 years. CBN News visited one of the events heading up to the election. the primaries for Likud, Israel's largest political party.
Welcome to Israeli democracy. This is the Likud primary, almost like a carnival atmosphere, where a number of candidates are running for 25 spots on the Likud list for this upcoming election on November 1st. More than 36 political parties like the Likud either hold primary elections to determine the list of candidates, elect candidates through their institutions, or appoint them through the party leadership. When the list is chosen, those candidates will qualify for the Knesset based on the number of seats the party wins in the election. For example, if a party wins 7 seats, the first 7 people on its list get those seats. CBN News talked with Jerusalem's Deputy Mayor Flor Hassan Nahum and a candidate vying for a spot on the Likud list about the importance of November's election.
Unfortunately, we're getting attacked left and right. As you know, countries adopting BDS legislation, countries who are adopting a narrative that has got nothing to do with the reality here against Israel.
The stakes are enormous, including the Israeli-Palestinian issue, terrorism threats on each border, the future of the Abraham Accords, and at the top of the list, a nuclear Iran. Despite these pressing issues, Hassan Nahum explained why Israel has had so many elections in the past several years and what caused the most recent coalition government to fail.
We have a system which is all about pro-Netanyahu, anti-Netanyahu, people who should be in Netanyahu's camp because they're right-wing, they have almost the same opinions about almost everything, but for personal reasons, they are anti-Netanyahu. And so in the last year, we had this crazy puzzle of a government where nobody could move, nobody could say anything, nobody could do anything, because everything would offend the other people that they were sitting with.
Many hope Israel's next election brings stability. And although its politics can appear uniquely chaotic, Hassan Nahum says Israel and the U.S. share a common political bond.
If anybody has any doubt that Israel is a lively, dynamic democracy, you just have to look at the images today and they'll know that Israel is an island in the sea. It's a democratic island, like America, same values, in a very different sea over here.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, the Likud primary, Jerusalem.
Coming up, just a year after the U.S. pullout, Afghanistan is becoming a sanctuary for terrorists. A sanctuary for terrorists. 1 year after America virtually handed Afghanistan over to the Taliban, Al-Qaeda and ISIS have made Osama bin Laden's dream come true. U.S. intelligence has evidence that terror groups are already building training camps inside the country, and that radical Islamists intend to launch attacks against the United States. George Thomas has the details.
Florida Republican Congressman Mike Waltz, a decorated former Special Forces officer who led multiple combat tours to Afghanistan, tells CBN News that a year after the Taliban takeover, the country is now a sanctuary for terrorists.
The intelligence community has been very clear to those of us on the Armed Services Committee that Al-Qaeda and ISIS are rebuilding and they fully intend to attack the West again.
Afghan watchers say the Taliban achieved what Osama bin Laden dreamed of and ISIS wished for: a full-fledged caliphate with the powers of the state.
With the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, these groups have been welcomed with open arms, even if quietly, and we've seen them reorganizing their efforts in Afghanistan.
Congressman Waltz says a year in, the consequences of America basically giving Afghanistan to the Taliban has meant a huge boost to militant Islamists everywhere.
I can share with you that the United Nations and their intelligence analysis shows that 10 to 15,000 foreign fighters are now gravitating back into Afghanistan.
In June, CENTCOM Commander General Michael Kurilla revealed U.S. intelligence that terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda are already building training camps inside the country.
Al-Qaeda may or may not choose to launch attacks against the U.S., but the fact that it has the capacity, that it has the safe haven to do so, that is what frightens me.
Indications are the Al-Qaeda-Taliban relationship is only getting stronger, as evidence that longtime Al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri lived in a posh Kabul neighborhood until the August 2nd U.S. drone strike killed him at the safe house.
The United Nations was reporting just weeks prior that top Al-Qaeda leaders were providing strategic guidance to the Taliban. And lo and behold, we kill Zawahiri in Kabul. I think this tells us everything we need to know about that Taliban-Al-Qaeda relationship.
While Taliban fighters took to the streets this week celebrating the one-year anniversary of their takeover, most Afghans stayed home, dismayed at the crippling and harsh conditions under the Taliban's Islamic rule. It's been a year since Afghan girls set foot in a classroom. Sordaba Nazan decided to run informal classes at this undisclosed home in Kabul.
The Taliban, with its extreme ideology that they have against women, have not changed. They are the same Taliban of 20 years ago. But we can't be the women of 20 years ago. We have to continue our struggle with the pen and our voices.
Women are banned from government jobs, forbidden to travel alone, and have been ordered to cover up.
Afghanistan as a whole is being denied the benefit of women and girls' contribution to society.
Meanwhile, the country's economy is in tatters, and 97% of the population has fallen into poverty, with reports of widespread starvation.
On the one hand, the economic situation is difficult. On the other hand, security situation is getting worse day by day. We still witness the same explosions and suicide attacks we used to witness in the past.
A year under Taliban rule, and there's already talk of Afghanistan becoming a failed state.
The future is very bleak. We see this as a precipice, and we are driving towards the precipice without even a safety belt on.
George Thomas, CBN News.
Up next, the Cyrus Accords. Could building on an ancient biblical relationship be the key to Middle East peace? We've talked a lot about war, but could building on an ancient biblical relationship be the key to Middle East peace? 2 years ago, the threat posed by Iran led to that historic partnership between Israel and 3 Arab countries known as the Abraham Accords. Although the agreement created new regional opportunities, as we've said, the Iranian threat is growing. While the Islamic regime vows to destroy Israel, it was ironically a Persian king who liberated the Jewish people centuries ago. As Caitlin Burke reports, experts believe building on that ancient relationship could be the true secret to Middle East peace.
Iran pumps millions into a not-so-secret war against the Jewish state through its proxies Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Officials in Tehran making regular calls to wipe Israel off the map. But this penchant for destruction hasn't always been the case.
We just cannot permit the betrayal of our society and our country.
It's hard for Americans in 2022 to imagine what Iran was like when I was born in Tehran myself.
More than 40 years ago, Iran and Israel shared a mutually cooperative relationship, the two countries working together in areas like economic development, agriculture, and healthcare. CBN News national security contributor Eli Kohanim experienced that partnership firsthand.
My own father had conducted business with an Israeli company where he had brought in Israeli water engineers who were already at the time the most advanced in the world.
That relationship turned hostile during the 1979 Islamic Revolution when Ayatollah Khomeini took power. 4 decades later, the Abraham Accords proves partnership between Israel and its Arab neighbors is possible and even profitable. Now, some former State Department officials believe the natural next step could involve the Iranians themselves.
So people see the benefits of deals like the Abraham Accords that their neighbors are reaping. So they see the new jobs, the healthcare benefits, the economic benefits, and they're asking themselves, well, why shouldn't we get some of those benefits of cooperating with Israel?
And there are protests going on right now, and that's why speaking out in support of them is so important, and why offering them, an opportunity, to say you don't have to be a pariah, you don't have to be isolated, and a deal like this could come to be.
As far-fetched as a partnership between Iran and Israel sounds, former U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor Victoria Coates and former advisor to the U.S. Representative for Iran, Len Khodorkovsky, say it's not just possible, it's the inevitable path to peace in the Middle East.
75 years ago, if I told you Germany, Japan, and Israel would be three of our greatest friends and democracies and capitalist partners and huge economies, you would have told me I was crazy. It's simply impossible to imagine. Yet here we are.
The two proponents have dubbed this potential peace deal the Cyrus Accords.
Cyrus the Great, who was a Persian king that liberated the Jewish people from Babylon and allowed them to go back to their traditional homeland and build their temple. He even financed the rebuilding of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem.
That act of inclusion and tolerance, has always been held up as an example of what is possible in cooperation between people of different faiths but similar morals and values.
To get here, Coates and Khodorkovsky admit the current Islamic regime will likely have to go. And it may surprise you who they think could help make that happen.
Well, curiously, the answer may lie with none other than Elon Musk.
Was not expecting you to say that.
Elon's been in the news a lot recently, but one of the things that he has done is deploy a satellite-based internet service, which is called Starlink.
Liftoff of the Falcon 9.
Operated by Musk's company SpaceX, Starlink consists of a network of more than 2,000 private satellites. It's touted as being able to offer high-speed internet anywhere on Earth.
Bringing in uninterruptible and uncorruptible internet access that would not make its users targets, but rather allow them to communicate with each other, because that's the way the regime has stayed in power, is they literally will cut off the internet for days at a time and prevent people from communicating. And if they can communicate, they can coordinate.
In February, Musk was able to provide internet access to Ukraine, even as Russia attempted to jam all signals, a move Ukrainian military leaders say has kept critical lines of communication open.
The people of Iran want to live in a free and democratic country. And what the United States and Western powers need to do is to support the Iranian people in their quest for freedom.
We shouldn't wait until the day after the regime is gone. We should think about that day right now and prepare for that day. Build those people-to-people ties, build business ties, create cultural connections. Work on practical projects that could potentially be, turned on the day after the regime is gone.
Coates and Khodorkovsky agree it's ultimately up to the Iranian people to take back their country. And amid reports of growing unrest, they believe that day could be coming. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
Still ahead, CBN's Operation Blessing helping Ukrainian civilians. Russia's war on Ukraine has taken a devastating toll on Ukraine's civilian population. Millions have fled to neighboring Poland seeking safety, where many are finding aid and comfort from CBN's Operation Blessing.
I had a beautiful life, I think. I was a teacher, a tutor, a chemist, a biochemist. I had my business in Ukraine. My life changed. I don't know who I am now.
As early as 4 a.m., Ksenia and many other crisis victims arrive at Operation Blessing's relief distribution in Krakow, Poland. Not only do they get essential supplies, they also get the chance to socialize with other Ukrainians and restore a sense of community.
We can just talk about our problems. It's helping me when I'm trying to speak about what I had, what problems and my experience. But when people are telling me their stories, it's very hard. You feel pain.
79-year-old Maria has been moving from place to place in Ukraine since the war started. But as the war progressed, she was forced to flee to Poland.
Actually, I didn't want to leave. It's very hard to get through this.
In Poland, helping refugees is becoming increasingly difficult due to a lack of funding. But thanks to the support of Operation Blessing partners, we're linking arms with Foundation on Life and DNA Church to distribute hundreds of bags of food to crisis victims. These bags are enough to sustain hurting families for at least 2 weeks.
We are grateful to Operation Blessing for their support. These bags are full of good products.
In addition to providing food and supplies, Operation Blessing is serving the hearts of crisis victims. Our team prayed for families at the distribution, including Ksenia and Maria, to show God's love and lift their spirits. Operation Blessing teams also showed Superbook episodes and ministered to children staying in shelters.
Showing God's love and mercy to these families is so important. My dream is that Jesus will always be first in what we do. When Operation Blessing came to help and started service with prayer, I realized that my dream came true.
Let's remember to continue to pray for Ukraine. That's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. I'm Julie Stahl. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.